What everyone desires in life is a loving partner, children, and the sense of fulfillment that comes from a complete family. We invest our hearts and souls into nurturing our kids, believing that our love and guidance will shape them into responsible adults. But who could ever imagine that the very children we raise, the ones we sacrifice for, might one day turn against us in the most unimaginable way? In a world where family should be a source of joy and comfort, the tragic case of Carly Madison Gregg serves as a haunting reminder of how quickly love can turn to horror and how the seeds of tragedy can sprout in the most unsuspecting places. Well, in Mississippi on January 15, 2024, a gruesome discovery shattered the calm of a small, close-knit town. Carly Madison Gregg, a 15-year-old high school sophomore, stood accused of a horrifying crime: the murder of her own mother, followed by a chilling attempt to take the life of her stepfather. The case sent shockwaves through the community, a place where violent crime was rare and neighbors knew each other by name. People were left grappling with the same haunting questions. How could this happen? What drove a seemingly normal teenage girl to commit such unthinkable acts against her family, the people she had grown up with and who had raised her? The tragedy that would later capture the nation's attention began as many do, quietly, without warning. Carly's life didn't stand out in any alarming way to those around her. To her teachers and classmates, she was academically driven, an introverted student who often preferred books and solitude over social gatherings. She wasn't the girl you'd expect to make headlines in such a disturbing way. On the surface, Carly appeared to be like any other teenager navigating the pressures of school, friends, and home life. But behind her quiet demeanor, she was hiding a darkness, a turmoil that few recognized or even suspected. As her trial began, the town learned that Carly had been battling inner demons for some time. Friends, teachers, and even family members hadn't noticed the full extent of her struggle. It wasn't until her arrest that the horrifying details began to emerge, a series of unsettling thoughts and behaviors that pointed to a much deeper issue. Carly's journal, full of violent fantasies and chilling reflections, painted a picture of a young girl who had become detached from reality. Her fascination with dark themes and manipulation revealed a side of her that was carefully hidden from the world, even from those closest to her. What could drive a 14-year-old to such a breaking point? Was it mental illness, untreated and festering beneath the surface? Was Carly's mind warped by external influences, like violent media, isolation, or untreated trauma? The trial attempted to answer these questions, but the answers were not simple. What became clear, though, was that this was not a spur-of-the-moment act. Carly had planned the attack on her mother and the stepfather, meticulously preparing herself for the aftermath, as if the gravity of her actions didn't faze her. This case not only shocked the town, but also left a profound impact on everyone who followed it. The thought that a seemingly ordinary teenager could harbor such violent intentions shook parents, friends, and professionals alike, raising serious concerns about how well we really know the people we care about. It underscored the chilling reality that some tragedies happen in the most unexpected places, hidden behind closed doors and in the hearts of those we least suspect. Let's see how it all started. Carly was, by most accounts, a typical teen, albeit a quiet one. She lived with her mother, who had remarried after Carly's biological father left the picture when Carly was young. Her stepfather was a supportive figure in her life, though their relationship was not without tension. Carly's home life seemed stable on the outside, but cracks began to show in the months leading up to the crime. At school, Carly was known to be serious about her studies. Her friends described her as reserved and determined to do well, but not the type to draw attention to herself. She wasn't involved in many extracurricular activities, and outside of school, she spent much of her time in her room, either doing homework or browsing the internet. However, beneath this quiet exterior, Carly was struggling in ways that no one fully understood. Mental health became a focal point in Carly's trial, as it often does in cases where someone so young commits a violent act. Carly's defense hinged on her mental state, arguing that Carly was overwhelmed by untreated mental health issues that led to a breakdown. In the months prior to the crime, Carly had been diagnosed with adjustment disorder with mixed anxiety and depression. Adjustment disorder is typically triggered by stressful life changes or events. And for Carly, this disorder reflected her inability to cope with the pressures of school, social relationships, and home life. Olivia Johnson, a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner, evaluated Carly multiple times, noticing signs of both anxiety and depression. According to Johnson, Carly expressed sadness, frustration, and a deep sense of isolation during their sessions. While she wasn't displaying extreme symptoms like hallucinations or delusions, her mental state was clearly deteriorating. Carly denied any active thoughts of self-harm, but her inner world was becoming darker, with feelings of hopelessness that nobody seemed to fully grasp. Carly's emotional struggles were further illuminated by her weekly sessions with Rebecca Kirk, a licensed professional counselor who met with Carly for 9 sessions leading up to the crime. Carly confided in Kirk about her frustrations with friends, her sense of loneliness, and her intense focus on school. Carly didn't talk about drugs or dangerous behavior, but there was something troubling about the way she discussed her life. A particular red flag came up when Carly talked about a novel she was reading, Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. In the novel, the protagonist grapples with the idea that some people, those who are extraordinary, have the right to break moral laws if it serves a higher purpose. Carly's interest in this theme worried Kirk, who noted that Carly may have been identifying with the character's dark justifications for violence. But even with these disturbing insights, Kirk didn't foresee the danger that was brewing inside Carly. Then came the day that no one saw coming. It started out as an ordinary day, but soon turned into a nightmare. Carly's mother was found dead, shot in cold blood. Investigators revealed that Carly had also attempted to murder her stepfather. What followed after the crime was perhaps even more chilling.
Always wanting to try to make friends at the house and around home. And
Carly, instead of fleeing in panic or breaking down, texted her next intended victim with shocking calmness, using the word honey in a message that suggested she had already moved on from the violence she had just committed. This cold, calculated behavior sent shivers through the courtroom during Carly's trial. How could a 15-year-old, barely more than a child, commit such a heinous act and show so little remorse or fear? What exactly had been going through Carly's mind when she made the choice to kill? As the investigation continued, detectives uncovered a vital piece of evidence, Carly's personal journal. The writings inside revealed a side of Carly that no one had seen before, a side that was filled with violent and disturbing thoughts. In her journal, Carly had written extensively about her belief that it's okay to be evil. She wrote of feeling detached from the people around her and expressed a sense of powerlessness.
She says, I put 3 in my mom, and I got 3 more waiting for my stepdad when he gets home.
That had slowly transformed into anger and resentment. Her writings echoed the themes she had admired in Crime and Punishment, the idea that certain people could justify committing immoral acts if it served their personal goals. Carly's journal entries became a focal point in the trial as they suggested that her actions were not impulsive, but rather premeditated and thought out over time. The evidence pointed to a troubled young girl who had embraced a dangerously warped worldview. Forensic psychiatrist Dr. Jason Pickett testified that Carly displayed many traits associated with psychopathy, a severe personality disorder characterized by a lack of empathy, manipulative behavior, and an inability to form deep emotional connections. Dr. Pickett explained that psychopathy, while rare, can manifest in extreme cases like Carly's. He noted Carly's lack of remorse as particularly troubling. Throughout the trial, Carly rarely showed emotion, even when the details of her mother's murder were discussed. This detachment, combined with her calculated behavior, led Dr. Pickett to believe that Carly may have been suffering from a more serious underlying mental disorder. The court learned that Carly had written in her journal about how to manipulate people, and that she often viewed others as obstacles in her path. While Carly's defense team argued that her actions were driven by mental illness, the prosecution pointed out that Carly's meticulous planning and cold demeanor suggested something far more sinister. The prosecution made a strong case that Carly, despite her mental health struggles, was fully aware of her actions. They argued that Carly had carefully planned the murder of her mother and the attempted murder of her stepfather. Her decision to send a calm, almost casual text to her next victim showed a level of premeditation and control that was hard to ignore. While Carly's mental health was clearly a factor, the prosecution painted a picture of a young girl who had chosen to embrace darkness, not as a result of untreated illness, but because she believed in the power that came with it. They pointed to her journal as evidence that Carly had adopted a twisted philosophy that justified her actions. Carly's defense team, on the other hand, portrayed her as a deeply troubled teen who had fallen through the cracks of the mental health system. They argued that Carly's depression and anxiety had reached a tipping point and that she was unable to make rational decisions in the days leading up to the crime. Her defense attorneys highlighted her young age, insisting that Carly was still a child who didn't fully understand the consequences of her actions. They also emphasized Carly's long history of emotional struggles, suggesting that her violent outburst was a cry for help that went unheard. Her defense team insisted that Carly's mental health should be taken into account when considering her sentence, arguing for leniency in light of her fragile state. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury finally reached a decision. Carly Madison Gregg was found guilty of first-degree murder, attempted murder, and tampering with evidence. Despite her age and mental health struggles, Carly was sentenced to life in prison, a devastating outcome for her defense team, who had hoped for a lighter sentence due to her age and mental condition. The courtroom fell silent as the sentence was handed down. Carly showed little reaction to the verdict, just as she had shown little emotion throughout the trial. For Carly's family, the verdict brought some sense of closure, but it also solidified the harsh reality that their daughter, once a promising student, was now condemned to spend the rest of her life behind bars. In the aftermath of the trial, Carly's family was left reeling, utterly devastated by the chain of events that had unfolded. Her mother's brutal death, her stepfather's severe injuries.
I know this sounds weird, but I honestly have never felt it to this day.
And now Carly's imprisonment had shattered the bonds that once held this family together. What was once a close-knit household, filled with the usual ups and downs of family life, had been irreparably fractured. The emptiness left by the loss of Carly's mother could never be filled, and the horror of her actions left a scar that would never heal. Carly's stepfather, recovering from the physical wounds of the attack, now faced the emotional trauma of losing his wife and watching his stepdaughter, a child he had helped raise, sentenced to a life behind bars. The extended family, too, struggled to make sense of what had happened. They were caught between grief for the loss of a loved one and the complicated feelings of guilt, confusion, and disbelief surrounding Carly's role in the tragedy. How had they missed the signs? Could they have done something differently to prevent this? These were the agonizing questions they would be left to wrestle with for the rest of their lives. Every family gathering, every holiday, would be marked by the painful absence of Carly's mother and the knowledge that Carly herself would spend her life in prison, cut off from the future that had once seemed so full of promise. Beyond the family, the wider community was left in shock and disbelief. Carly's crime wasn't just a tragedy for those closest to her, it was a wound that spread throughout the entire town. This was a place where people knew each other, where violent crimes were rare, and where families felt safe. Now that sense of security has been shattered. Neighbors who had watched Carly grow up, who had seen her walk to school and play in the yard, were forced to confront the unsettling reality that something so horrific could happen in their quiet, seemingly peaceful community. The crime sparked difficult conversations among residents. How could something like this happen here? Were there warning signs that everyone had missed? And perhaps most importantly, what could be done to prevent this from happening again? Carly's actions raised uncomfortable questions about the struggles that young people face. Struggles that are often invisible to those around them. Mental illness, isolation, and the pressures of growing up in today's world were suddenly brought to the forefront of the community's consciousness. This case became a catalyst for discussions about the urgent need for better mental health resources, especially for teenagers. The signs of Carly's deteriorating mental state had gone unnoticed by many, but now in hindsight, they seemed glaring. The importance of recognizing and addressing these issues early on became painfully clear. Mental health professionals in the community began advocating for more accessible resources for teenagers, emphasizing that Carly's tragedy could have been avoided if she had received the help she desperately needed. Schools, too, began reevaluating their mental health programs, understanding that young people like Carly could be struggling in silence, their inner battles hidden behind good grades and quiet behavior. The aftermath of the crime also forced people to reflect on the broader societal issues at play. Youth violence, a topic that many preferred to believe was a problem for big cities and troubled neighborhoods, had struck in their own town. It was no longer an abstract issue, it was a harsh reality. Parents, teachers, and community leaders were left grappling with how to address this growing concern. What role did social media, violent media, or even peer pressure play in shaping young minds? How could parents and educators ensure that the next generation was equipped to handle their emotions and the pressures of life in a healthier, more constructive way? As the town tried to heal from the trauma of what had happened, the case left behind a legacy of reflection and change. Carly's story served as a reminder of the hidden struggles that so many young people face, and it became a call to action for those in positions to make a difference. The community began to prioritize mental health discussions, aiming to create a safer environment where young people could seek help without fear of judgment or stigma. The hope was that, by doing so, they could prevent another tragedy like Carly's from ever happening again. But for the family at the center of it all, the damage was done. Their world had been turned upside down, and they were left to pick up the pieces of a life that would never be the same. They were haunted by the memories of what had been lost, both the vibrant, loving mother who had been taken from them and the daughter who had made the unthinkable choice to take her life. As Carly began her long sentence behind bars, the echoes of her crime would linger in the hearts of those left behind, a painful reminder of the fragility of life and the darkness that can sometimes take hold in the most unexpected places.